I'm gonna be straight with you. Returns suck. And no matter how you try to sugarcoat it, it's disappointing when you get a return request. But in this video, I'm going to tell you everything that I know to help you navigate through that return request to avoid as many problems as you can, and maybe some takeaways as for some best practices that you can apply so you don't have to deal with so many returns. So let's get on with it here on the other side. So without any further ado, let's go. So let's start at the top. And it really starts with how you have your listings set up. And you start your listings with your policies. So you got to make a return policy. For most resellers, you'll have an option where you go into the upper left-hand side of the screen on the PC, find your name, the drop-down will take you to your account, click on that, and you'll go to business policies. And then under business policies, you'll have the ability to go in and create a policy. So now once we're here, we'll kind of cut on over and you name it and then go down where you really have an option, a few options here, but it starts with, let me show you the two here. It starts with either domestic and international. Now for the sake of this, to make things simple for you, keep international returns off and opt into eBay's international shipping program. It'll make your life just a lot easier. Trust me on that, and that's a video for another day. So to move on though, let's focus on domestic returns. And now, so there's some of you out there who will be tempted to say, look, I don't want to deal with returns. And let me just tell you, that is the worst mindset to have. And the reason is, it may seem like you're saving yourself a lot of hassles, but you're really not. A buyer can force returns on you. And if you have no returns selected, it's going to show in your listing to any prospective buyer that this seller does not accept returns. What's the big deal? Well, that screams that there might be a problem here. And any buyer that has two brain cells to rub together will look at that, and it might scare them off, because we've all been there. We've all had situations where we've had to return an item, brand new items for that matter. And you might have an item that's perfectly fine, but something could happen between now and the time that the buyer gets it, doesn't work properly, and buyers don't want to be in that position. They want to have some type of confidence when they're buying your item. So my recommendation to anyone out there is to do not select no returns. Toggle that switch on and allow yourself to set returns. Now, you can choose to do 30 days. That's the sweet spot. Some people don't care. They want to deal with 14 days. And look, it doesn't matter what you want to do. You can do 60 days. But just remember this. The more time you give the buyer, the more confidence they will have in buying your item. And the more eBay's algorithm favors that. So if you have no returns set, if you have 14 days set, those kind of things do not yield to a positive buying experience, and eBay sees that, and you might actually hurt yourself in the search rankings for that particular item. So I like to side with 30 days. Some sellers do 60, and that's fine, but I think the sweet spot is 30 here. Then you have to decide, am I going to pay for the return label, give the buyer free returns, or is that buyer going to pay for the return? And for the most part, I look at how large the item is and basically the cost of a return label. So for me, anything that's larger than 2 pounds and a fairly large box, over 12 inches in any dimension, then I'm looking at the buyer paying for the return, because if a buyer opens a return, they can select changed mind, they can select doesn't fit, they can just change their mind, and you're on the hook for that return label. And it doesn't sting as bad if it's a smaller package, like under 2 pounds. So that's the way I sort of do it. That's my gauge. But some sellers have free returns on everything. And of course, the algorithm favors that, because you're lending a really, really good buying experience for that buyer. To make it simple, I would just simply put money back, name your policy, and be done with it, and move on to the next step. Now you've shipped the item, everything's great, item arrives, buyer gets it, you think you're home free. Wrong. Because in most cases, You have up until 30 days. Depends on how you have yours set up, but 30 days for most sellers. That buyer can receive it, use it, break it, do whatever they want to your item, and then they have the power to go into their account and open a return. And like I said, there's many reasons where a buyer can open a return. They can open it because they changed their mind, it doesn't fit, item not as described, which is an INAD, arrived broken, and all these things where a buyer can choose, and there's a few more that they can choose, and about half of those reasons they do count against you as a seller on your return score, if you want to call it, for lack of a better term. So if it's determined that you have too high of a return rate as compared to your peers, then eBay can go in and charge you an extra 6% in final value fees for items within that category where you're very high in your returns. And that won't come down until you've actually proven yourself over time and brought that score down, because eBay evaluates your account every month. And you just don't want to have that happen to your account. We already pay enough in fees. You get the return request. Okay, the feeling steps in. You're disappointed. You get that feeling of, what did I do wrong? Or, how did this happen? And you start looking at the value. You start looking at, well, now I'm going to lose that money and it sucks. Well, I get it. But the mindset you should have, and I'll just tell you this, I'm not going to preach to you, but this is something that I had to learn. You don't actually earn the money for that sale until your return window is over with. So for me, it's 30 days. So after 30 days, after the buyers received the item, not from when you shipped it, but from when they received the item, they can open a return. After that, for the most part, you are home free. Now, there are exceptions. A buyer can request a return after your return window. I always, for the most part, decline those, and you have the option to decline those as well. Or they can open a chargeback. And these things are fairly rare. If you sell 1,000 items in a year, you're probably looking at 2 or 3 of those situations. So it's really not a whole lot, unless you're just extremely unlucky. So you have this return request now that is in your eBay dashboard. Rule number 1, do not ignore that return request. In fact, eBay gives you like 2 or 3 days, I believe it's 72 hours, to go in and either give them a full refund, which in most cases, do not do, guys. Do not do that. You have the right to get your item back. Get the item back, and by doing that, making the buyer return the item, you have an opportunity to then resell it if it still has value. Because in many cases, I found the return is either a buyer remorse, or the user or the buyer doesn't know how to use the item properly. So that's something that I would certainly urge you to consider, to have a mindset of, unless you screw up, you're not giving a partial or full refund to a buyer. And I think if we collectively have that mindset, we can change a lot of these buyers. Because what happens is, buyers will reach out to you and they will fish. They'll throw their line in the water and they're waiting for you to bite. They know that you don't want to pay for that return label. So they throw that line out and they're trying to get you to bite. So they'll send a message saying something to the effect of, I got this item. It has a insert problem here, and what would you like to do about it? Or how can we handle this? Or I would like my money back, or give me a partial refund and everything will be okay. These people know how to work the system. And like I said earlier, you have the right to get your item back. If you cannot confirm, maybe they'll send you photos to prove that there's a problem with it. And in that case, if you didn't disclose the problem, then you might want to maybe offer them some type of a partial refund as a resolution. But for the most part, you should be going through sending the buyer a return label. Now, if the buyer is paying for the return label and they're using a remorse return reason, like doesn't fit or changed mind, you can go in and you have to confirm the address. I don't know why eBay does it, but that's just the way they have. You have to confirm the address that the buyer is shipping it to. eBay will provide the buyer the label and deduct that cost of the label from their refund when you're processing the return. Now, if the buyer chooses an INAD return reason, means it's your fault, whether it is or not, well, you are on the hook for that return label, and you have to go in and determine if you want to send by FedEx or UPS or USPS. Generally, an option that you've offered the buyer initially. So if you only offered them one option, that's all you'll get. And then eBay will then provide the return label. Now, you can go into Pirate Ship or UPS.com or any FedEx.com and go in and provide your own return label. On larger packages, you're probably better off doing that. If you have a good steep discount like I do on FedEx, go in and buy the return label and then upload it. I'm not going to go over that now, but you'll need to kind of figure that out. There's other videos and stuff that people have on that. Provide that return label, and now the buyer, they get a good solid like 30 days. And I don't have the policy in front of me. I don't want to get knee deep in policy on this video, but they have a solid 30 days to get that item back to you, where you have like 3 days to deal with the return request. They get a lot longer. So now you're waiting. It's a waiting game. Now you are waiting, hoping of two things will happen. Either they ship it right away so you can resolve this thing, or if they're not going to ship it right away, then they forget about it, they make it work, they live with it, whatever, and that return request for them times out, and you'll get a message from eBay saying that return request is timed out. But if you get the message saying the buyer's returned the item, well, now it's a waiting game for it to arrive. And once it gets back, you then will receive the item. You'll then have, again, that 2 to 3 day period where you have to go in and refund that buyer for their purchase. So now here's where things work. You have an option as a seller to inspect the item. If it's the same item, same condition, all accessories, then you get all those things back. You have to give them a full refund. Now, if it's a remorse return where they said change mind or doesn't fit, if you've charged them shipping, so like a lot of my items, I'll sell the item to the buyer but charge a shipping, maybe a fixed price shipping or calculated. Well, in that case, I don't have to refund the original shipping that they paid, because on remorse returns, that's just the way it's set up with eBay, and I have a defined shipping cost that the buyer has paid. Has nothing to do with the price they paid for the item. But if you have free shipping and the shipping is built into the price of the item, well, you can't deduct for shipping because there's no defined amount that the buyer has paid for shipping versus the item, and it's all built together into free shipping. So you can't deduct any amount for the label. So you have to give them a full refund in that case. So if you get an item that's broken, maybe the buyer used the crap out of it, it's not in the same condition, maybe the item's missing accessories, or maybe they sent you a brick, maybe it's not even what you sent them, you can go in using the refund tool and you can deduct up to 50%. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, if you're deducting anything, because eBay has a chart they want you to really use based on the condition of it, and they have a chart. I'm not going to go over that with you. I'll let you go into help and contact to see that. But that chart breaks it down. They want you to give the buyer 75% of their money under this situation, 65% of it under that situation, or you can give them 50% back if it's like not the same item or really damaged and nowhere in the condition that you sent them. But whenever you deduct anything from a buyer's refund, eBay is not going to give you your final value fees back, your promoted listing fees back. Anything you've paid eBay for that sale, you're not going to get back. So my advice to you is, if you're not deducting a full 50%, it's not even worth messing with. Just give them a full refund. Get your seller fees back. I'm telling you, the fewer times you use that tool, eBay kind of frowns upon people who use that tool on almost every return. And it's disappointing, I know, to have to give a buyer a full refund. But take that item and try to relist it. Now, maybe it comes back in a different condition. Sucks. right? 50% reduction refund, or not at all, up to you. But maybe part the item out or relist it in the current condition if you can, if it is worth relisting. And sometimes you can't. It has no value and you just got to move on, and you cannot allow it to bring you down. One thing you got to know is that these returns are bad returns are few and far between. So maybe one or two bad returns out of every like 10 to 15. It's not a whole lot, guys. And if you're doing this for the long run, it's the cost of doing business. I know a lot of people hate me saying that, but that's just the truth. If you allow one bad return to bring you down and to make you want to quit, then really reselling is not for you. So ultimately, now if you get the item back, now eBay wants you to process the return within three days, 72 hours. Don't ignore that. What happens is if you forget, maybe you put the package aside and you just forget about it and that time lapses, well, eBay will step in on your behalf and they will refund the buyer before you have a chance to even check it. They'll give the buyer a full refund. But even worse, they ding your account for a defect, meaning that it's an eBay steps in without seller resolution defect, and enough of those can get you knocked down on your seller level. Also, one thing I didn't mention earlier, if you get the return request and you ignore it within 3 days, well, guess what? The buyer gets to keep the item and they're going to get a full refund, and you're going to get a defect like I described that goes against your account. All bad things, guys. So it needs to be a priority. Get on these return requests. Once you receive the package, get on with handling the inspection and then the refund process when you go in and refund the buyer. Now, one thing you got to know is if you need to make an adjustment using the refund tool, there's a couple things that sort of that entails here. You have to get the refund tool, you have to either be top rated. If you're a top rated seller, then you do not have to offer free 30-day returns. Okay. If you are above standard, which is the basic seller level, you're not at top rated seller yet, and that's sort of where most people start out. Well, if you're at above standard or worse, you have to offer 30-day free returns to even have access to that tool. So it's something that you need to keep in mind. Also, if you're going to deduct anything, and again, I wouldn't deduct anything less than 50% because of the situation with eBay refunding your fees, you're going to have to show some photos. eBay requires you to put a reason in the box, and you're going to actually have to show photos as to what's going on. Why are you withholding this money? So you have to justify to eBay why you're doing this, because what's going to happen in most of these cases, the buyer's going to see you've deducted money from the refund. They didn't get a full refund, and they're going to contact eBay because eBay gives them a 10-day window, 10 business days, to come back and say, okay, there's a problem with this refund and I don't agree with it. And in most cases, eBay will side with the buyer. The good news is they're going to cover the refund of the difference to the buyer. In some cases, though, they may take it out of your money. So also that transaction's usually put on hold. So until that buyer gets back to eBay or accepts the refund from eBay. So now, all this information, there's a lot to digest, I understand, but there's some ways that you can go in and sort of lessen the chances of getting these returns in the first place. And the number one way of lessening your chance to get a return is through simple communication with the buyer. And for many, it's including maybe a card, a thank you. If you have any questions, or if you have any concerns or complaints or any problems with this sale, please message me directly. Because what happens is a lot of times buyers will open a return request without even trying to talk to you as a seller, when their problem could have been easily resolved without opening a return case. Maybe it's the functionality of an item, or maybe concerns over something else. A lot of times these buyers think they're dealing with eBay, the company, instead of mom and pop seller like you and I. And by opening up that dialogue, by putting a card in their package telling them to contact you, or even this, something that doesn't cost anything, reaching out to every buyer that's bought your item. You're waiting to ship that item tomorrow, they just paid for it. Send them a message thanking them for their purchase and letting them know we'll mail this out tomorrow or in 2 days or whatever it is. And please contact me once you get it if you encounter any problems. Because now that buyer knows that they're dealing with the person and not eBay, and they're going to be more apt to reach out to you, not only to thank you because they're not used to that type of service, but when they receive it, if they notice there's a problem, they're going to reach out to you, which allows you a couple things. You can be creative if you want. You can handle a return any way you want without them even opening a return if that's the way you wish, if you want to keep your metrics low. But to me, it's just the better way of providing customer service, and that is certainly the best way to handle that. The second way is to describe your items as clearly as you can. Identify any problems with the item if there are any problems, and take very, very good photos. Zoom ins are good. As many photos as you can to describe the item, because that is part of your description. Because see, people don't always read the item description. So if you go in and say, well, there's a crack on this item, or maybe it's missing this accessory, because they don't read the item description, they don't even notice it, and they're going to get the item and they're going to be upset. And then they open the return request because you haven't communicated with them. But if they're ones that they look at all the photos, but that crack is there, or that it's clear that the accessory is not part of the item because you have good photos, then yeah, you're not going to get the sale, or maybe they will still buy it reluctantly, but you're not going to have the headache because you're providing that buyer solid information to make an informed purchase. And many times I've noticed that in the past, where I go in and I don't have so many photos, but I do a great job of describing what they're getting or what they're not getting in the item description, and the buyer is upset, they open a return because they thought, see, buyers don't always read. That's a thing you're going to have to figure out over time, that buyers look at pictures. Buyers aren't going through all that trouble to read a novel in your listing, and a lot of times they're not even going to catch it. And because they assume, and because they're the buyer, eBay is going to side with the buyer over the seller. That's just the reality, and it's a reality we have to live with to get through this game of reselling with our sanity, is that eBay is going to side with our buyers. It's the way it is. And you're going to get these disappointing returns. And in many cases, it's not going to be your fault. And when that happens, you just need to just shrug it off, accept the return, process the return, and get on with the other items, get on with the other customers, because if we're here to build a business, we cannot allow these returns to slow us down. So hopefully this information gave you a lot to think about, and maybe some things that you can apply towards your business. But figuring out how to deal with returns and doing it in a way where you can reduce the number of returns is yet another example of how flipping ain't easy. And I want you to have an excellent rest of your day. We will talk to you very soon. Take care.